Apple a Day with Dr. Amanda, Wisdom Wednesday, which is all about talking about a topic that week and thinking about all the speakers of the week. And so an Apple a Day with Dr. Amanda is 5 days a week. I am so glad you're here. If you are on YouTube, make sure you like, share, subscribe, or tell a friend. Know the purpose of this channel and empower people to use their voice to speak about overcoming mindsets themselves, really different areas of life, empowerment in different areas to become the best version of yourself. This week's topic was really talking about sexual trauma. And sexual trauma is an area that I do a lot of blogs. In fact, if you go to my website, it's www.healthyrootsllc.com, and I'll make sure I have that in the podcast and on here. I have different blogs. I have at least 10 different blogs talking about how to overcome sexual trauma, how it impacts kids, how it impacts teens, different things that go with that. And then also how this sexual trauma disclosure is really difficult, especially for little kids, teens, or adults, and how to do that, and different information. I also will be going into different information about sexual trauma and mental health, and also in the area of eating disorders. So if you look at anorexia, bulimia, compulsive eating disorders, and just body dysmorphic disorder. So again, that's not our topic, but certainly it's related because sexual trauma is what I'm talking about. And I do a lot of blogs and a lot of teachings and education in the area of sexual trauma and mental health. And so as I'm continuing on, just know that that's part of my heart. And so with sexual trauma, I wanted to really talk about safety, sexual trauma and safety. So I know we had our guest Tiffany on. I am a survivor of sexual trauma. And again, that's part of my story. I have many things to come. But with that, a lot of times that what happens to people is that they feel a loss of safety and security. And some of our most basic needs, whether it be Erik Erikson or even Maslow or any of those different people in different ways they show that safety is huge. And even Judith Herman, who has many books for counseling psychology, talks about the importance of safety and feeling safe and secure. And a lot of times when you've had that, especially as a kid, it totally rocks your world and it changes your feeling of safety and what that looks like, because you don't know boundaries, right? Perhaps you did before, but when someone violates you, and especially with sexual trauma, it's so important because that's a part of us that when we're older, right, and when we're adults, maybe, and in marriage, usually, sometimes it happens beforehand, but in marriage, it's a time when you're in union and one with one other person. And what happens is if that gets stolen from you younger, it impacts your entire identity. It actually fragments and shatters it because, we talk a lot about identity, but anytime you have any type of abuse, whether it be emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or all combinations of all three, and neglect, it impacts your entire persona. And unfortunately, I'll be talking about family patterns, but one of the big things, and even from my studies with my counseling, trauma counseling, is that family patterns, when you think of adverse childhood experiences, that's actually the bottom of the triangle. So any of you are in education or even counseling or even school psychology or any type of field, the bottom is the foundation. So if your foundation was rocked by sexual trauma or any type of trauma, it's going to impact everything about your physical and mental health. And so even if people haven't experienced that, some people say, well, I had a normal family life. And again, what is normal? Because we all have perceptions about how we feel or belong as even young kids. And so what happens is in family patterns, if we had that happen before in other family generations, that can impact us. I always like to say, there are studies today that show even from the mother, from cortisol and different neurotransmitters and some of that, the cortisol, if mother's highly anxious, that can pass on to the child in the womb and they can be more anxious. So again, the same thing. Think about it. When you have a mom and a dad come together, whatever genes they had and any stuff within them, they're basically, you're becoming in that little womb, all of those cells come together. Any of that trauma and cellular memory trauma happens. And so you may be having part of that. So if there was any type of sexual trauma or neglect, that's impacting you. And if it hasn't been dealt with, then it could impact you in a different way. And so that is a lot of the research that's coming out, as well as what happens with people, even when we talk with people, whether it be narrative research, qualitative research. I say that not lightly, but I say that not only just from my experiences, but that any type of trauma, and especially sexual trauma, because it impacts you. Someone is doing something to you that is not supposed to happen, is very confusing. And so it impacts and shatters your identity. And you start early as young as that happens, unfortunately, a lot of this trauma happens for young kids, that you just get confused. Who am I? And who am I? And what's my identity? And it gets stolen, or your voice gets silenced because of the trauma. And so as you used to have something safe, right? We had people holding us, or hopefully sometimes there's abuse where there's, violence or anger, and we hear that as kids, and that does impact us more than we think, because that's what it's showing in research, or even how we respond as adults. But what happens is you no longer feel safe. So some people don't even feel safe just from the sexual trauma, but they're in an environment where they're hearing yelling, or they're hearing it's just not safe, and they're not getting that attachment needs that they need from their parents, and the bonding, or the switch from the mom to the dad, or they've been taken out of the home. All of that impacts you. Yes, research does show connection, and having healthy bonds with the mom or parents, or with, again, foster parents does help that. Those relationships matter, but that pain and that stuff that happened with your identity is still impacted, and it's very painful and complicated and complex. So if you're listening in, again, this might be a lot to think about, but I just want you to take what you need to, and know that I say it with a heart that wants to know that I love you out there, and that I'm saying this with a heart to say you matter, and your pain matters. And if you are confused, or if there's stuff with identity, I totally may not understand, but I've had my own journey with that. And when we've been through any type of abuse, it shouldn't have happened. It's not your fault, and it mattered. And so if you're listening in, please know that I care, and that I have experience and wisdom that I've learned from the journey that may look differently from yours. But based on my experiences, a lot of times it almost shatters our identity. And as my good friend Elaine, who talked about, recovery from rejection, abandonment, she talks about identity and abuse, and identity abuse. And from abuse, it impacts and shatters our identity. I call it shattering of your identity and of the core of who you are. And so there is hope if you've been through this. But this is what I want to talk about, because after we've had sexual abuse, safety is important, right? Every time when I'm talking to other people that have gone through this, we may not feel safe, and that may change our body, meaning at night we might be afraid to sleep. We might have heavy breathing, or get scared at night because we don't know what's going to be coming. We may get more depressed or anxious. People who've had sexual trauma may have more anxiety or depression. Anxiety may be internal, where we're constantly thinking, racing thoughts, anxious about things, not feeling safe, having fears. It could be depression, where we're just really sad and we just can't get out of our funk, and meaning like we just, we're very sad, beyond normal circumstances, even showering or doing normal hygiene things could even be impacted based on our state of mind. There are, more specific things on anxiety and depression, but that can look differently in each person, external and internal, for both anxiety and even that depression. And there could be different things that come with that. So when I'm talking about, sexual trauma and safety, it really does impact us. So imagine if you're a little kid that happens to you, you can't even really comprehend it. Imagine, because the prefrontal and the frontal cortex doesn't develop until your 20s. So imagine that most adults, and even young adults, haven't even had their whole brain develop enough to make decisions about themselves. But yet when they're young, something happened. And a lot of times with that, science is showing, and there's been many fMRI studies and brain research scans that show that trauma does impact your body. In fact, it changes the brain. And the brain can change over time, but it does change the brain and its impact and the matter in it, unless there's help and interventions. And so when we're looking at that, what happens a lot of times, which ends up saving a lot of people until later when they have to deal with it, unfortunately, is that they may not remember the abuse. You end up, your brain dissociates, so it takes those memories and puts them in another place so that you're not remembering them constantly, so that it's not part of that nightmare. However, Bessie Vanderkolk says the body does keep score. So a lot of times it may be decades later that you start remembering things, or you have little visions and memories of something that happened. And it's scary because you can't believe that. It could be someone that you trusted. It could be a family member. It could be a friend of the family. And so all of those things are so scary because, again, it didn't happen during that time, and it did happen earlier, but you didn't remember. Or perhaps some people did remember, and when they shared it with family, they said, don't ever talk about it. Because again, depending on the era and the decade, some people said, nope, we're not going to share that. It's never to be said again. And it was seen horrible as a punishment. So we have a lot of different decades of generations that have lived with believing, well, that's in the past, and they suppress it. And when you suppress your emotions and your memories, is not healthy because it comes out later and it may not look pretty. It'll impact you and your relationships. So it's so very important. You matter so much to get help or counseling and get those emotions dealt with so that you don't carry that on. And so one of the biggest things for me in my own personal journey, and I'll, kind of just speak in general, is about getting that support and knowing that you can reestablish safety. Again, as Judith Herman always says with her book, it is feeling safe. And that is hard to establish if you never have that. Some people don't feel safe at home, school, with other people. They don't know who to trust, because when you have a violation of your body and in sexual nature at an age that you shouldn't even be doing any of that, that is so confusing for a child. And there's all that other stuff, depending if they remember. So it's very scary. And so establishing safety a lot of times is if they do have somebody safe, right, being able to connect with them, being able to trust them. And unfortunately, a lot of times with people who've been through trauma, they pick people that aren't safe because they don't know, or people target them. And so it's really this ongoing cycle unless we can get help. So if you are in the fields of professions, you want to make sure that kids feel safe. And a lot of times if they don't, sometimes if they're dealing with it, they may be outwardly trying to hit people, kick people. You have boys and girls that have gone through sexual trauma. It's not just girls. And a lot of times boys are more afraid to share that, and it's really still the stigma, or they don't remember, or it's too scary to remember later. Or they're like, oh, that happened. But it does impact you, even as an adult and as a younger kid or teenager, because you're still, what happens is a lot of times people end up in their behaviors acting out what happened when they were kids, and they don't know why, or even that cellular memory trauma. And that's a big issue, because we want to get kids help early and be able to deal with the pain. And a lot of times feeling safe. And I know Craig Miller, he also spoke on the love hug. So again, depending on when you see this podcast, may have been previously or even after this one, but he talks about this, where we are, when your left and right midbrain, it really, what it helps is you to remember what you need to remember, release emotions. And so it really pretty much works like your REM cycle, helps with that. So just like sweat, you can actually release your emotions. And I've seen that happen even in my own life, where I'm able to identify the emotions and keep working on it. Sometimes there's layers, but being able to reestablish safety, people being safe, me feeling safe, even during times, taking deep breaths. A lot of times we tell for kids that are in counseling, or if they're needing that, even in the classrooms, taking a deep breath, safety plans, what makes me feel safe, taking a quick walk, breathing in, grounding, making sure I touch something, take a big glass of cold water that helps my brainstem and helps me calm down. It's a good one. Making sure I'm here. So I might look at something in the room and ground myself, or look at light and say, here I am, speak out loud, whatever it needs to be. Whatever is safe for me in that moment, or for that child or for that teen we want to go to. Because again, sexual trauma, the biggest thing it does do is hurt us in our core. And so again, you'll maybe wondering, well, why are we talking about that? But that's the biggest thing. And safety is so huge, because a lot of times if we don't feel safe, we'll act out of that. Or sometimes if we don't think we deserve to feel safe, we'll act out of that. Or we're not worth being kept safe because we've only experienced people hurting us, we'll act out of that. But I just want you to know, if you're listening in, you matter. Your safety is important, and what happened mattered. And I said that in the beginning, but I mean it. A lot of times we don't feel safe, or we don't think we deserve it because people have told us that, whether through their actions of harming us or through life. And I just want you to know that you matter. You have the right to say, no, that doesn't feel comfortable. Even as an adult, you have a right to say, you know what, I don't feel safe. And you have a right to say, why am I not feeling safe? What does this remind me of? And that's painful. And I want to make sure that if you do, start having memories, or you're really grappling with, what do I do? Make sure you get to a counselor. And like Craig says, he's a counselor that likes to get right to the roots and help people. And if you have complex trauma, which is a lot of ongoing trauma over years, it does take time. There's a process, but make sure you see people and go to people that have that trauma focus and that can get to those deeper roots, because the biggest thing is reestablishing your safety. And you want to have a counselor, you want to have friends, you want to have people that are safe as you're going through, and reestablish your own safety. So again, if you're listening in, I'm sorry if that happened to you. If you're listening in because you want to know what to do for friends, or maybe people disclose things, there are hotlines. I would recommend calling, national hotlines. I'll have this on here. If you're struggling with this and other things because of it with mental health, I'll have those lines on here for podcasts and on the Apple a Day. If you also are just, seeking other resources, again, we'll have that on there. But it is important you call the national hotlines or call, there's all kinds of different, child trauma hotlines or even websites, and even national and the state. Each of your states should have different information on what to do. And even for disclosure, depending on minor and whatnot, a mandated reporter, again, depending if you've ever had kids disclose or say something about this, because it's always resulting with that safety. Important numbers to know for that as well. So I hope you're well. This is a more deeper topic, really wanting to dedicate time with sexual trauma and safety. There's so many other areas of sexual trauma, I'll be on here for, but I wanted to really just dedicate some time just to talk about sexual trauma and safety. And a lot of times that gets taken away and it shatters our identity. Who are we? And we don't even know boundaries. We have to relearn them. We have to learn who's safe. We have to learn that we matter. We have to learn our worth. We have to learn that we're worth protecting. I mean, it's some work, but I am here to encourage you and say that you matter. Keep going. Don't give up. You're amazing. So be well and tune in again for some more daily wisdom. This is more of a heavier topic on sexual trauma, but so needed in our society. And sometimes we don't know what to do, but knowing how to keep people safe and what feels safe to them, and that's a good question to ask them, matters. What makes them feel safe? How do they feel safe? Maybe they don't even know what that is emotionally, physically, right? And around them, what is safety? And so those are some things that I will leave it with you. I hope you're well. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, tell people or subscribe to this. You're amazing and incredible. So take care, and I'll see you back for a Daily Dose tomorrow.